Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host. And with me this evening, I have the other host from Inside Scoop, Mark Levine. But he's not here in his capacity as the host of the mothership, so to speak. He is here because he is a candidate in the 8th Congressional District. Most of our viewers know that Congressman Jim Moran has decided to retire at the end of this session, and there is a free-for-all going on in the 8th District, and Mark has thrown his hat into the ring. We actually have him a little early. The official announcement is tomorrow, but it's fine because he's here tonight. So first, for those of you who don't know Mark, and he doesn't go through all of his credentials before he begins his own show, so let me tell you a little bit about Mark, and then we will turn to Mark. Mark has a macroeconomics degree from Harvard College. He studied under Martin Feldstein, who was, of course, President Reagan's chief economist. He went to Yale Law School to get his JD, and I will not hold that against him.
Thank you.
And he was also a Fulbright scholar studying European politics and law in Switzerland. And of course, we know that he is the host of Inside Scoop on television, but he is also the host of a nationally syndicated radio show by the same title. He is frequently a guest with Bill O'Reilly, taking him on. He's been, I think, on the Kelly File. Oh, yeah. He has been on CNN. He has been all over the place, including a turn on Iranian television that was an interesting story. But we are here, Mark.
It is a long story.
It is a long and interesting story. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You are kicking off my series of 8th Congressional District candidate interviews. And so I want to talk to you about what in the world are you doing?
What am I doing?
Yes.
I think the people of the 8th Congressional District want an aggressive progressive. They want someone who's taken on the right-wing propaganda machine for the last 10 years on local, national, international TV and radio the way I have. I also think that I have the longest record of anyone in the race on federal issues, because for the last 10 years on radio and TV, I've had, more than 2,000 radio shows, several hundred television shows. If there's a federal issue before Congress that I haven't dealt with, I'm not sure what it is. Someone will have to let me know. I mean, we've talked about every issue under the sun. But also, and this is the part of my resume you didn't mention, but I know you know it, prior to my career in TV and radio, I worked several years for Congressman Barney Frank. Right. And he was my mentor. And working for Barney Frank, who's truly one of the biggest progressive lights of the day, a lot of things I learned. One, I learned constituent service. I mean, Barney Frank was great at constituent service. He made clear that every single letter was answered, that everyone who wanted to meet with him personally got to meet with him personally at least once. That's something I want to do as well. But also, he made people understand why he supported the things he did. And then, of course, he would go toe-to-toe with Republicans. And I learned under his guidance everything from legislative drafting to how to even work across the aisle. I mean, there are some bills that Barney Frank signed on with Ron Paul. Now, I'd be the first to tell you that Ron Paul, I think, is wacko on a number of issues, but on things like decriminalizing marijuana, for example, ending the drug war, legalizing online gambling and regulating it. There were issues we could move across the aisle, and what Barney Frank taught me is that when Republicans are willing to be reasonable, there's no reason you shouldn't work with them. But when they're not being reasonable, to call them out. And he would call them out so loudly that when he got on the House floor, you could see the Republicans scurry away because they didn't want to deal with him. So I have a history of 13 years. First 3 years under Barney Frank, learning under his training, and then 10 years of calling out Republicans. And here's the heart of the difference, I think. Every one of these candidates running, all of us, good Democrats, virtually all of them will cast a solid blue progressive vote. But I don't think a vote in Congress is enough. You get 1 out of 435. I really hope the Democrats take back the House in 2014, but if we don't, we'll be in the minority. So what do you do when you're in the minority? You just cast a vote and go home? I don't think so. What you do, I think, is you change the debate. You go out there and you argue the way Barney Frank did, the way I've done for 10 years on television and radio, and you aggressively point out the holes in their arguments. That's what I do with Bill O'Reilly all the time. I point out the holes in his arguments, and I think we can actually win over the debate. And here's my example. So 2 years ago, President Obama compromised with the Republicans on the tax bill because they threatened to shut the government down. They threatened to cave on the national debt. And Obama said, don't do that, I'll give you some things. And at that time, I had attacked President Obama, who I largely support, but I thought that was a mistake. And I thought it was a mistake because I think if you give in to those kind of terrorist tactics, they're just going to come back. And what happened, of course, we all know, a few months ago, they shut the government down, right again. But this time, President Obama stood firm. This time he called them out. This time he aggressively said, no, we can come to some agreement, but I'm not going to just give in because you're threatening to shut the government down. And he stood firm. And this time on the national debt, the Republicans quietly caved. So I think that Bill Clinton, even Ronald Reagan showed you can go over the head of the representatives of the American people directly to the American people. That's what you can do on television. That's what you can do on radio. And when the Republicans are being recalcitrant, when they're being ridiculous, when they're not supporting things like a background checks that the vast majority of Americans support because we don't believe that mentally ill people should own guns, or when they're trying to cut Social Security, which is one of the great programs, mainstays, where I would actually expand Social Security. And I think I'm the only candidate so far that has called for that. I hope the other candidates will join me in that.
When you say you would want to expand Social Security, what are you talking about?
Okay, so Social Security is funded, many people know, 94% of Americans pay 6.2% of their income into Social Security. 6% don't. If you're very, very rich, you pay very little. If you make $100,000 a year, you pay 6%. If you make $1 million a year, you pay less than 1%. And if you make $1 billion a year, you pay less than 1,000th of 1%. So millionaires and billionaires don't pay the same percentage of their income as an ordinary middle class or working class American. If we simply made the 6% of Americans who earn over $170,000, if we simply make them pay the same amount that everyone else pays, Social Security has money to last for a century, so much so that we can actually increase benefits for seniors that rely so much on Social Security. We can expand Social Security. Rather than fight the Republicans who are trying to cut it, let's expand it. Let's be aggressively progressive. And that's one of the many things I support.
And do you think that, because right now, you're a commentator, you're a pundit.
That I am.
And so you get invited on to shows like Bill O'Reilly's and these types of things. As a junior, assuming you got elected, you would be one of the very junior people in Congress. Do you think you're still going to have that same opportunity?
I think I am. We'll see. I mean, I can't promise that because it's not my decision. But I've done more than 100 national TV shows, and maybe 200 now, I have to count. And so they know me. I'm a known commodity there. I actually think being a congressman gets me more cachet to go out there and argue national views, even more than I have now, because now I'm not just a pundit, a Democrat. I am a Democratic congressman, and I want to go on Meet the Press, and I want to make that argument for the people of Virginia's 8th, because I think that when the people of Virginia's 8th just have a congressman voting their way, it's not enough. To actually make the argument to change, to give you another example, and I can go on and on policy, but student loans, for example. So it used to be that the government subsidized student loans. The GI Bill, right? They all came home from World War II, they could go right to college. My dad could put himself through college, he paid for about half of college, by working summers and 20 hours a week. You can't do that anymore. Kids are drowning in debt. And one of the reasons they're drowning in debt when they come home from college and have to live with mom and dad is because student loans today, the government takes a piece of it. They make a profit off of it. Used to be the government subsidized and helped people live the American dream. Now they actually grab the American dream away from kids trying to succeed and give that money to wherever agribusinesses and corporate welfare, wherever there's a lot of wasted spending. It's not on kids. We need to help the American dream. We need to bring back the American dream, and we need to reclaim student loans. And other than Elizabeth Warren and me, I'm not sure who's talking about that. So I want to bring up issues, not just the standard progressive issues that I think all the 10 candidates agree with, but actually expand. Talk about expanding the American dream. Don't just protect it, expand it.
So how are you going to get there? Because you're running against folks, the vast majority of the people in the field are already elected to something. So they've already got a constituency within the 8th district in some way, shape, or form, some part of their district. So how do you expand the folks who are coming out? Because basically, I think you would agree, the issue here will be decided on June 10th.
Of course.
So you've got a short...
the winner of June 10th, obviously, is not going to go to sleep. You have to keep working on for the general. But yes, I do strongly suspect the person who wins the primary wins the general election.
So how do you expand that behind the standard Democrats who have gone to the polls before and have pulled that lever for one of your opponents?
Well, I've never been on the ballot before, so they're going to have a choice, a new choice with someone like me. I'm going to raise enough for them to hear my message. And if they want the aggressive progressive, they're going to elect me. If they want someone who's going to go out there and actually change the conversation and talk about not just, for example, on global warming, okay? I would slowly get rid of coal in America. I think coal is dangerous. I think coal is dirty. And that's not something you hear politicians talk about very much.
No, you clearly are running in the 8th Congressional District
I am,
in Virginia.
but I'm also running on my own record. I'm running on things I've talked about for 2,000 radio shows. I've talked about mountaintop bombing, what they're doing in West Virginia, where they're actually using explosives to blow up the mountains, and it rains arsenic and cadmium, selenium, these heavy metals down into our rivers, and that eventually, some of them end up in the Potomac. I mean, these are things I've talked about. I've talked about domestic violence on my shows. I've talked about child abuse. I've talked about women's right to choose. I've done several shows on immigration. I was a citizen activist on issues from marriage equality to domestic violence. God knows I've talked a lot about Bush v. Gore, but because I believe that voting should be protected and we need a new Voting Rights Act. And I've talked about that as well. So people can see my record. They can see what I've talked about. They haven't had a chance to vote for me yet. And that's not to knock any of the other candidates. They've had their chance. They've run in Virginia. This is a federal race. Let's talk about federal issues. Let's talk about what federal issues matter to the people in the 8th Congressional District. And I'm ready to have that debate.
Now, is there anything, as you think back, because you've mentioned all of these different shows and all of these issues,
I've done a lot,
that you are thinking to yourself, oof, I hope nobody digs through the archives on this or that issue? Or have you done the traditional politician, well, I've evolved on that, as so many of them say when they suddenly are changing positions? Anything going to come back and bite you?
I do not envy the person that's going to be assigned to do negative research on me, because they're going to have to search through thousands of radio shows, and some of them are 3 hours long, and hundreds of TV shows, and maybe someone will do that. And Bettina, it might be possible that on August 12, 2006, I said something stupid. It might just have happened. And if that happens, I'm sure someone running a negative campaign will find that 5 seconds and make a soundbite. But I mean, I know me, I know my positions, they haven't changed over 10 years. If I express something inartfully, look at the rest of the clip, I'm sure I made it clear. I may have gotten a fact wrong, but usually if I get a fact wrong, I find out, I correct it on the air. So I'm not real worried. I mean, someone can go and look and find something, but I may have called a Tea Party Republican a not very nice name. I may have done that.
That might have happened.
But other than that, I think I'm okay.
Well, Mark, thanks for coming and kicking this off.
Thanks for having me, Bettina.
Good luck.
Thank
you. You're absolutely right. Whoever has to do the opposition research on you
have a lot of work to do.
Is in for a time, so that's really going to be a whole lot of fun for them. But anyway.
Thank you, Bettina. Thanks for having me on the Inside Scoop.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. Sam's. No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done.
D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing social security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, F.
What are those? Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time.
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, come and see me for twice-yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice-yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
This is Inside Scoop Virginia, and we have tonight Patrick Hope with us. He is a delegate from the 47th District, which is Arlington. I don't know if you have other parts of
just Arlington.
Just Arlington. Oh my gosh, that's an actual unusual situation. Usually it's parts of this, parts of that. But what Patrick is here to talk about, and I will say Patrick is another candidate for the 8th Congressional District seat as well. But what Patrick is actually here to talk about tonight is an area of his expertise, which is health law. Patrick is an attorney. He graduated from the Columbus School of Law, if I've got that right.
Correct, yeah.
And he has been in the General Assembly since, I believe, 2010.
That's right.
So, and he is one of those folks where anytime a health-related issue comes up, people say you need to go talk to Patrick Hope. So he's going to kick off our show on mental health to help us understand what the process is. We've all read about it, either back in 2007 with Virginia Tech, or unfortunately more recently in November, when Deed's son attacked Senator Deeds and then killed himself. And in a lot of those news articles, there were phrases like emergency custody orders and temporary detention orders. And we're going to have Patrick explain those to us, and then we're going to talk about the legislation. So I really appreciate you taking time to come and talk. So first, explain what this emergency custody order, temporary detention order thing is.
Okay, because it's very complex and very confusing.
Okay.
When someone is picked up by the police for some crisis, the sheriff or the police take them to be evaluated by the community services boards. And the community services board are people that are made up of psychiatrists that oversee the policies and procedures for people with mental illness.
Okay.
And they will decide if that individual at that time is a danger to themselves or others. If they are, they enter into what they call an ECO, an emergency custody order. At that point, they decide if that person does fit the description of being a danger to self or others. They put them into a temporary detention order. And that's the process where they look for someone to find a bed to put them. And right now, the current law says that you have 4 hours to find a bed if that person is eligible. 4 hours. You can add another 2 hours to it, so it's 6 hours total. And we think what happened in the Senator Deeds case with Gus, the tragedy there, is that they exhausted those 6 hours. And by law, they were forced to let him go because they could not find a bed. And so that's when the tragedy occurred, when Gus went home and disaster struck, a tragedy struck. And this does happen, we know, frequently in Virginia. It doesn't happen on a daily basis, but it does happen frequently. It rarely ends up in the tragedy that we saw back in November, December it was. But that's the situation that we have in place.
So do these emergency custody orders only come up if the police get involved? Can a private citizen say, I think this, my husband, my wife is having issues, and go and get one? Or
That's right. You go in and you get evaluated by a therapist, and if they decide that you fit the description of being a danger to self or others, then they go ahead and start the process to find a bed. And executing it is where the issues are, and finding a bed. And typically, beds across the country are very hard to come by. And what the person from the Community Services Board will do is they will call around to private hospitals, and if there's no bed located in the region there, they will try state hospitals. But since we've been downsizing, closing institutions since the 90s, we've really struggled to find beds. And so it's not uncommon for a community services board to call somewhere here in Northern Virginia. They would call somewhere south of Richmond just to find bed availability. And that takes a lot of time to go through that process to find out where the bed isn't eligible to find a bed. And once you do that, you have to hold them for 48 hours. And at that point, that's when you come back to stand before a judge to find out whether there needs to be a commitment hearing.
All right, so at the end of this process is the commitment hearing itself, which I've heard are just retching for people who have to go through them, particularly folks who are trying to get help for family members, because it's somewhat adversarial. People are on both sides. Somebody gets appointed, I think, to represent the person you're trying to commit, and it can get
It's an involuntary commitment, and so you're not involuntary means you're not doing it willingly. So you're being forced to do this. But if the court finds, after speaking to experts, that you fit that description, then you could be sent to some facility where for up to 30 days that you could be sitting in a bed getting treatment, forced treatment.
Now, how difficult is it to get one of these detention orders or to get somebody committed? Because my understanding had always been that some part of that process was supposed to have been loosened up after Virginia Tech to try and avoid some of these problems, but it didn't particularly work, or is it really a bed issue?
Well, it is a bed issue, and I think with Senator Deed's son case, it was a bed shortage issue, and we don't know the full details of the investigation. We should know that soon, but we think what happened in that case was that they went through the 6 hours, couldn't find a bed, and they were forced by law to release, and they had to go. And that's what the focus of our legislation is right now. That's what we're focused on really intently in this session. And with the budget that just came out this week, there's over $40 million, nearly $50 million in for new mental health services.
Well, how long is that going to last? Because I remember a similar figure was put into the budget after Virginia Tech. And then with the ensuing recession that came up and other priorities intervened, is the fact that it happened to a senator that everybody knows going to be enough to keep that money actually available? Well,
and that's what we are at the legislature. We are being very cautious to make sure that we do keep that money in there. And you're absolutely right. We are now, current law, we are below Virginia Tech level. We put in about $45 million right after that tragedy at Virginia Tech, and we are now below those levels. So it's clearly something that we got to keep our eye on the radar. The recession was what defunded it. We need to make sure that we not only build on the mental health reforms that we're putting in place this year, but we expand on them. I believe that this is just the first step. There more needs to be done.
Well, let's talk about what you're trying to get done, because there were a couple of different components of the bills, and the House bills have now gone over to the Senate, and then Senator Deed's bill, which seemed to have just sucked up everybody else's bill, came over and is in the committee. You're on that mental health subcommittee for courts of justice. So what's the whole status of this? What are these bills going to do? Are we going to get these little piecemeal House bills? Do you think it's going to be Senator Deed's bill? What's your guess?
That's a great question. I mean, there's really three components, and we mostly agree, but there's one major difference between the two bills. The first thing we agree on, the House and the Senate, is we agree on putting in a real-time registry so that when folks from the Community Services Board are looking for beds, they will see all the hospitals, both private and the public facility, mental health institutions, how many beds that they have available. So they're not wasting time calling, looking for beds. So they know exactly where they are. To be real-time registry. So we agree on that. Second thing we agree on is that once you get close to the end of the emergency custody order, the timing to that, then the public health facility will be the bed of last resort. So we'll make sure that will be the safety net, that if there's no place available in the private hospitals where you call first, the state facility will be the bed of last resort.
Well, what kind of state facilities do we have anymore?
Well, we have about 5 or 6. In Northern Virginia, we have the Northern Virginia Mental Health Institute, which is located at Fairfax Hospital. And it has, unfortunately, not enough beds. And that's another issue in of itself, because we got a lot of people in there that are there ready for discharge, but there's no place in the community to put them. There are people in there that are there for not guilty by reason of insanity. And so they're just being housed there, and they're taking up bed slots. And so that's another issue that we need to deal with. But the third area, and this is really where we disagree, is Senator Deed strongly believes that we need to increase the amount of hours that you can hold an individual before finding a bed. And his bill has it from 24 hours. So as I stated earlier, the current law is 4 hours, plus you can ask for additional 2 for a total of 6. Right. He wants to take it to 24. The House bill just builds on it, allows you to have another 2 hours on top of the 6.
Right,
for
so
a total
you get
of 8.
A total of 8. Okay.
Yes, yes. And of course, there's some pushback that we've gotten for Senator Deed's bill. The sheriffs don't like it because the sheriffs have to hold the individual for the 24 hours. That takes time away from their deputies. We don't think that necessarily you need that long. There's been studies that have come out saying that 97% of the people that need to be placed to find a bed have a bed found within the allotted current 6 hours. So it's those that remaining 3%, those are the individuals that we need to make sure that they never fall through the cracks, that if they are deemed to be a danger to self or others, that we find a bed for them. And so the question really is it going to be 24 hours, as Senator Deeds would like to see, or is it going to be 8 hours, as what the House has passed? And I think that there's some civil rights issues in there. ACLU has some concerns about holding individuals for that long.
Now, do they go for the 8, or do they want something in between?
They support the 8, and of course we'll come together, and there'll be a conference committee, and we'll decide what's the best place. Somewhere in the middle, there's a sweet spot between 24 hours and 8 hours.
Because what happens in this whole process, if somebody gets picked up on the street at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, by 6 or 7 in the morning, your 8 hours is gone, and you're. I mean, I sort of think of the nighttime, and I know it's not true for hospitals, but sort of as this dead zone of if you need to find somebody a bed or you need to do the evaluation, are there really people able to do that then?
CSBs are open 24/7, and you're typically right, that's where people get picked up. Right. And they're usually picked up for misdemeanors, failure to ID, trespassing, drunk in public, something like that. But they have a serious mental illness on top of that. And what we have in many facilities, and this is what I'm so grateful about seeing in the budget this year, is that we have what we call crisis intervention centers. So what the police can do when they pick someone up who they suspect for a misdemeanor, who has they believe is a serious mental illness, they can take them to a crisis intervention center to have them evaluated by the CSBs right away. And then they can drop that individual off and go back out on the street. And that's a much better place to put them than put them in a jail.
Right. So what do we'll see how that plays out, but I want to go to the second point. We've got about a minute and a half left. What should we be doing? You said this is the first step. What do you think ought to happen, assuming we get one of these through, we get the registry, we get some of these other things through, we figure out the hours. What do we need to do?
We need to take a comprehensive approach to our mental health system. We need to focus heavily on prevention. Let's prevent a crisis from ever occurring. And so let's make sure that we have more therapists, more access. When you or I get sick, we call the doctor, and the doctor says we can see you in a week. Well, when you have a serious mental illness, you don't have a week. You need to see someone right away. And I think that's the value that we're going to see with the Affordable Care Act. When the Affordable Care Act is going to cover people with mental illness, there's going to be mental health treatment in the Affordable Care Act. 80,000 people in Virginia will now get coverage that they didn't have before. So that's the first thing. That's going to be very helpful. Medicaid expansion is very much a part of that because a lot of people are low income, they're veterans, they need to get that access to therapists and psychiatrists when they need it right away. And the third part is the crisis intervention. PAC teams, we need to make sure when someone does go into crisis, we have the services there to get them through it.
Well, we are going to have to leave it there, but I thank you for coming in, and we will have you back to talk more about this and to talk about your candidacy.
Thank you.
But thank you so much
Delighted
for
to be
coming
here.
back.
Thank you so much, Bettina.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me.
There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, Thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
This is Inside Scoop Virginia, and we are talking about mental health tonight. And we have two new guests who are going to talk about some grassroots efforts in trying to help people who have mental illness and help educate us. I have immediately to my left Ellie Hoptman. She is a graduate from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and you're now getting your master's degree, I guess, clinical mental health counseling at GW.
That's right.
An intensive program. You were diagnosed with bipolar disorder back when you were a teenager, and we're going to talk about that. You grew up in the Northern Virginia area.
Yep, Vienna.
In Vienna itself. Perfect. And you are all involved with the NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Health and Mental Illness,
yes.
Northern Virginia.
Yes.
I'm going to get the whole thing done. You're a peer mentor. We're going to talk about what that is. You're involved in this Ending the Silence program.
Right.
And I want to hear all about that.
Okay.
So welcome.
Thank you.
And then we also have Jeanne Comeau, who is the executive director of the National Alliance on Mental Health for Northern Virginia, which is the local chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And you became involved through the family-to-family programs that get run. Right. And we're going to talk about that. You're also a Northern Virginia native, went to Woodson High School and then George Mason University with an interesting degree for this kind of work in electrical and computer engineering. I saw that and I thought, okay, well, we'll see how that helps out. So it was interesting, but thank you for taking time to come, to both of you, and talk with us about this kind of issue. We had Delegate Patrick Hope on, who was talking a little bit about what they're trying to do down in the General Assembly. But what I want to find out is, what does NAMI in Northern Virginia actually do? Because there is this NAMI at the national level, and there's this NAMI at the Virginia level, state levels, and then there's the Northern Virginia piece. So what is it, Jeanne, that you do?
We at NAMI Northern Virginia, which is, as you mentioned, the local affiliate of NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, we provide education programs, support groups, and events that help support individuals who are living with mental illness and also family members. And in addition, we reach out to many groups in the community. So students, for example, police officers, we're part of their crisis intervention team training and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of work that we do to support the community.
Okay. Now, how did you get into this? It was the family-to-family sessions that they have. Tell us about that. Tell us how you got involved.
I was involved because I was trying to support one of my children who was exhibiting some symptoms that I didn't quite understand and didn't know how to support him. So I looked around for support groups and that type of thing, and I finally located NAMI and was really thrilled to learn about their family-to-family program. And what that is a 12-week class, and you learn more about what mental illnesses are, what to look for, what the medications are, also some local supports, what's available in the community as far as the Community Services Board and that type of thing. And it's just a really supportive class, and from there then you have a lot more opportunity to know how to advocate for your child and what to look for.
Well, Ellie, now you had this diagnosis, but how did you end up getting involved in NAMI?
Well, I got involved with the NAMI, interestingly enough, through a web search. I wanted to get more involved in the line of work that I am so passionate about and also affects me so greatly. And I saw that they had a race, a walk, actually, it's not a race. And I went and got involved. I coordinated a little team. It's their fundraiser for the local affiliate. Okay. And I was just so impressed with the energy and the enthusiasm and just sort of the general mission of NAMI Northern Virginia that I jumped on board 2 feet quickly as I possibly could, just kind of hit the ground running. So, it's also really important to me that I give back in an area where I've gotten so much help. So.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that. But one of the things I wanted to follow up on, Jeanne, is you mentioned the symptoms. So what are the symptoms? If you are, I read some statistics someplace that said 1 in 5 youth between the ages of 13 and 18 will start exhibiting signs of mental illness, and that 75% of the people will experience it by the age of 24. When I read that age 14, I thought to myself, how do you tell whether your child is having mental illness issues or it's just your usual hormonal problems with teenagers and rebellions and just regular old acting out that, of course, is just everywhere, that everyone always is talking about and always complaining about when kids hit that teenage year? What are the symptoms? What do people need to be looking for?
It is a challenge because, like you said, children have a wide range of emotions and behaviors and that sort of thing. But I think that, and this is why I appreciate NAMI, because you can sort of compare notes with other parents and start to figure out yourself, knowing your child and what you're hearing, what is sort of normal and what maybe needs some looking into. So, for example, sometimes children that age group can have hallucinations and are hearing voices, but it may not be to that extent. Sometimes children as young as 3 will report having sleep difficulty, and that's something to take seriously because sometimes that's a symptom. They may not even be exhibiting other behaviors at that point. Children age 18 to 13, there are 21% of children in that age group who experience mental illness severe enough that it's disrupting their daily lives. So I think that if your child is not doing well in school or is not, maintaining friendships or is having challenges that seem to go beyond what the normal childhood challenges are, then trust your instincts as a parent and reach out to other parents for that support, because you don't always get that in the broad world, that support, that to trust your instincts.
Well, and that's the kind of thing, particularly if it's your first child, where you basically have no idea what you're doing anyway.
Right.
But that concept of, is it normal? Is that what one of the benefits is of the family-to-family meetings? Because what's normal, and you don't usually, sit around and have a cup of coffee with your neighbor and say, by the way, I'm wondering about my kid. I mean, you don't do that. So, is that the place where people who are concerned ought to be checking out the website and
that's exactly right. And there's another resource too. There's a second class called Basics, and that was designed more specifically towards parents of children, school-age children. So for example, children who are grade school through 12, and it's a shorter class and designed with parents in mind, and it does talk a little bit more about the special needs that families face, including if your child needs an IEP, an individual education plan, something to that extent. And then we also have support groups. So if a family wants to go every week or a couple times a month, that sort of thing, they can go year-round for a support group. And as you said, exactly, it's a place to go safely talk about what's going on. And the other exciting thing is you walk into a room full of people who know exactly what you're talking about before you open your mouth, and it's just very supportive.
So what do you actually look for, though? I mean, if I have a kid who I would look and say, well, he's spending all of his time in his room, or he's spending all of his time on his computers, or is that something that should cause people alarm, or does it need to be coupled with something else, like with grades dropping, or they're no longer playing sports, or they're, to me, that's kind of like a difficult thing. I mean, you had this when you were a teenager.
I was a teenager, yeah. So I think the first red flag is sleep. Once that starts getting disrupted, lots of things can go wrong. So if irregular sleep patterns are happening, that's something to definitely pay attention to. You'd be surprised by how much sleep can just kind of throw everything out of whack. So
that's a huge issue, I know, in Fairfax. They've got that sleep coalition saying you need to let the people in high school start later so they can sleep more. I don't think anybody ever really thought that it would affect people's mental health.
Well, it more affects if there's a condition there. So if there is a condition there and you notice and you're thinking, well, maybe I should get something checked out, and you're noticing the sleep is off, you're noticing the mood is off, the interest is lacking, either a great increase in appetite, a decrease in appetite. For me, I stopped eating. And I was actually misdiagnosed as anorexic, but I wasn't sleeping. I was upset. There were other things that should have been paid attention to that people kind of got the signals and wires crossed. So I think the first thing I would look for is, the first thing I would say is trust your instincts. I mean, my parents kept pushing, kept trying to figure out exactly what it was and weren't taking no for an answer. And I think, they, even though they had raised my older sister ahead of me, she hadn't experienced anything like I was experiencing. And I think that even if they hadn't had my older sister, they would have known, okay, something's off. I mean, I think it's very, very rare where you have an instance, and correct me if I'm wrong, an instance where it's just so out of the blue and extreme. I think if you're paying attention to your child and loving your kid the way a parent should, something's going to pop up.
It's true. The sleep, as Ellie said, and also a lot of people notice, the teen years, they kind of say, well, drug use and alcohol use is kind of goes along with the territory, but not necessarily. And many people of all ages living with mental illness self-medicate, and so that could be another symptom or another sign that something, someone is trying to seek relief and they're not getting it. Also, if they're not able to continue to participate in sports or their friendships, they're having, they come home and report that their friends, are complaining about their behavior is something that you see sometimes. And so, just reaching out at that point is very important.
Okay, so we hopefully if people sort of pay attention. I'm a little concerned when you were saying you got misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
And I do sort of wonder what kind of training like pediatricians have. I mean, it would seem that they ought to have some kind of specialized training if mental illness symptoms can come so early in children's lives. But I'm thinking back, my sons are 30 and 25, but I don't remember any kind of concept with the pediatrician, never asked me about any of these kinds of things. It was just, it never would have occurred to me well, thankfully I didn't need to, but they didn't inquire. I mean, is that a lacking in their training, or is this something people need to be more aware of, or one of those you need to be your own advocate? I mean, how does it work?
I would say that with, my pediatrician definitely failed me in sort of trying to figure out what was going on. But I would say that a lot of it has to do with educating yourself and educating your family and reaching out to the resources that NAMI and other organizations like NAMI provide. Because a pediatrician is an MD, so they have a huge knowledge base, but like you said, they're not specialized in any sort of pediatric mental health necessarily. So making sure that you can report to them what's going on rather than waiting for them to ask you, I think is huge.
And I think that's where, being a strong parent advocate comes in, because if you think something's, needs to be looked at more deeply, you can ask your pediatrician for a referral, because they typically do have a relationship or know of some good, but they may not necessarily make that referral unless you're really aware of what's going on and really asking for it, as Ellie said, like her parents did.
Well, we're going to go to break, and then we will be coming back to continue this conversation. Stay with us.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. One of some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before we give it a try. Don't play with matches, don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ripped off life, nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches, don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire!
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent.
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and we are talking about mental health, mental illness, and we are here with Ellie Hoptman and Jeanne. Oh gosh, Jeanne, I'm going to get it wrong. Comeau. I look at it and it looks French, and I'm like, but is it French? Let's talk some more about high school and your particular circumstance, Ellie, because you were diagnosed when you were in high school. But what was all of that like? You've said your parents were really persistent, and there were some misdiagnoses, but you, on your side of this, what was that whole episode like as a young person? And what was school like, and friends, and that type of thing? What was all of that like?
Well, just as a background, so I was diagnosed when I was 15 with bipolar disorder, and it started probably in October of my sophomore year with the manic episodes, and then starting around Christmas I just crashed, and that's when I entered into a depressive state that things sort of started, okay, we have to do something. She's not just really animated, really energetic. There's something going on here. And so for someone suffering from major depression or a depressive episode in bipolar disorder, it's the single most lonely experience. No matter how great your support team is, your family is, it's the single most lonely experience you can ever imagine, because you feel like no one can relate to you. Especially, I mean, as a teenager, you have that sort of personal fable anyways, where you believe that you're incredibly unique no matter what anyone else has to say. So then you throw in mental illness in the picture, and you feel like no one's ever going to be able to relate to you in your entire life. You have no concept of, okay, this is going to last for X number of days, or Y number of weeks, or Z number of months. I mean, there's not really a way of knowing that anyways. So this great unknown, and it's just lonely and miserable. I laugh or cry. But, but as a school age teenager, my friends didn't know what to do. So they didn't do anything.
Now, did they think there was something wrong, or they just didn't say anything? Or?
Well, I think my friends originally noticed that I had a lot more energy when I was more manic, but they thought it was fun.
Right.
And then when I started getting depressed is when they started jumping ship. So they didn't really, I don't blame them. I mean, it's really hard to deal with depression at any age, but when you have no education on how to deal with it at 15, 14, it's even harder. So because I believe they didn't have any base knowledge of what they were looking at and what they were dealing with, they just decided not to deal with it. So you take the lonely experience of depression and you lose all your friends in school, and it just compounds itself. And I ended up actually having to leave school because I just couldn't take it. I mean, people could not relate to me on any level. So I ended up leaving and going to a day treatment center, sort of like part hospital, part school, more just like a structured environment that you'd have somewhere to go during the day that's not school with your peers that you just have nothing to talk to about and don't even want to talk. I mean, I didn't even want to talk to them, so.
So when you left school, had you gotten the diagnosis already, so people knew what it was?
I left school springtime, and I got my diagnosis in January. So it had been a while. And you know what was great was my guidance counselor. I'm actually in school with a bunch of school counselors right now, and they have extensive mental health training now. And my guidance counselor in high school, I swear he saved my life. I mean, he was in the classroom, he was getting work from my teachers, he was advocating for me when it was time to leave school. He helped me leave school. I mean, he was the greatest advocate at Madison High School.
Really? I wondered about that because you see so many of the counselors and so many of the school psychologists talking about there are just too many kids, and how helpful are they when it's a real crisis?
Well, he was a good one. I mean, he was a gem. I think that there are a lack of gems in the school system, or they're gems but they can't reach their potential because they're so bogged down with paperwork and bureaucracy and red tape. I mean, there's so much that school counselors have to handle, from not even mental illness. I mean, college applications and recommendation letters. I mean, there's just a lot on their plate.
So you went to this special program.
Yes,
did you,
at Children's Hospital. It's a day treatment facility.
And so did you stay there for years?
I was there for two weeks. Yeah.
Oh, so it was short term.
Yeah, and then Fairfax County does this wonderful thing. Well, they'll do homebound instruction for kids that qualify. They have to be sick, and they have to be a certain meet certain qualifications, and they'll actually send trained teachers to your home until you're able to return to school. So I didn't return to school until my junior year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important message for kids to hear, as well as parents, because I think there was a perception in the past that, oh, I'm going into the hospital and that's it for the rest of my life. And now, as you can see, 2 weeks can really make a big difference in someone's life. And there's hope, and people recover and lead wonderful lives. Yeah. And that's the whole message that, we bring through our program. So.
Yeah. Well, and that is a huge issue because particularly, and you said it, you can't estimate how long is this going to last. And as a young person, you don't have any kind of life experience to say, okay, I can get through this kind of thing if it goes on. So that notion of, yes, there is hope, there is a way out of this, I think is a really important message, because a lot of people don't feel that way. And
I agree.
I read some statistic about the youth at risk surveys that they do in the Fairfax schools, and the number, fully a third of the people in 10th grade and people in 12th grade have said that they have been so depressed for at least 2 weeks in a row that they couldn't function. And that's 1 out of every 3 students in those grades are feeling that way. That's an enormous amount of anxiety and depression and just non-functioning people.
And they don't talk about it.
Right.
And that's where I think peer education and just education programs in general are so important right now.
Well, tell me about this Ending the Silence program, because you're involved in that. What is that? That's something you go to the schools to do? What's involved?
It's a new program in Northern Virginia, but it's a NAMI program that takes, there's one young adult presenter, which is me, and then another partner. And we go in and there's an extensive PowerPoint presentation where we give the basics of, this is what mental illness is, but it has sort of components to it that will capture the attention of a adolescent or a school-age child. So they'll talk about current celebrities that also have the same diagnosis, and there'll be interactive piece and some sort of incentive for participation. And it's supposed to design to, I guess, educate schools and kids on what it looks like, what to look for, and how they can help.
Right.
It's supposed to end the stigma and get people to talk about it. Because if you talk about it, you're much more likely to get treatment for it and find out is there a real problem.
Well, and so is this done you do this in health classes? Are you getting a good reception? How does if somebody out there has a child in, Madison High School where you went, or down at Langley where they had those 2 people, 2 students who killed themselves a few weeks back. How do they get this in? Does it have to be the principal who invites you in? I mean, how does that work?
We've had a variety of ways. Anybody can contact us at NAMI Northern Virginia to request a presentation. We depend on our volunteers, so we have to work with their schedules. But we actually started doing something similar through our In Our Own Voice presentation, which is 2 presenters who share their stories. And now that this program is available for the high schools, we've moved to that for that age group, so they can contact us. And people offer it anywhere from through their health classes, through school-wide assemblies. We've had one at Fairfax High School where several hundred children attended, and the guidance counselors reported a great increase in the numbers of visits they had from students, which was exciting to us because it meant that they were seeking help for themselves or their friends or a family member and that sort of thing. So we've seen it just been a wonderful program.
Well, let's talk about what you should do. If you are a young person And you see these kinds of changes in your friends, where you see the whole manic thing, and everybody always thinks, oh, manic must be great because you're getting stuff done, you're doing stuff.
Gosh.
But then you go right over that edge,
Yeah.
and at some point in time, you're going to get that flip
Exactly.
side. And of course, the people who are merely depressed don't get the manic end, they're just depressed.
Right.
So you see somebody who is depressed, whose behavior has started to change, who doesn't seem to have any interest in doing things, not just doing things that they used to do, but doing pretty much anything. What should a young person do?
Well, I can say what I would do. What I would like to have happened when I was younger is I would love to have someone come up to me and just say, hey, what's going on? And if I don't feel like responding, then I don't feel like responding. But it's just knowing that someone out there cares is a big deal. It's a big deal. And knowing that someone is there for you, even if you don't want them, just knowing that they're there is a huge comfort. And I also think that if you're concerned and enough, you should definitely tell a trusted adult, a guidance counselor, a favorite teacher. If you have a close relationship with the parents, talk to the parents, say, hey, I've noticed that my friend is starting to behave differently in school. What's going on, Mrs. Smith? You know, just sort of take an active interest, and don't be pushy or persistent because it's a sensitive issue.
Right.
There is that stigma piece. But having someone to talk to and having someone who's compassionately caring for you is a huge thing. So I would say that if it's someone you're close to, I would say reach out. I would say if it's someone that you are noticing is really struggling, go to an adult quickly. But not just any adult, one that you know will step in there and make a difference, because I think if you go to the right person, you can really go a long way.
And I think that extends to parents too. How do you respond as a parent? Because I remember as a parent sort of oscillating between, I want to support my child, and getting the messages from the school system and the community saying, well, you know, you just got to tell them to buck up and do a better job. And it was very difficult because I was confused myself. I didn't have enough information. And I remember I learned so much from my son, who's the individual who's in my family who's struggling, and he once turned to me and said, Mom, don't you think if I could, I would?
Exactly.
Because he wanted to succeed.
Yeah.
And it was just a really good lesson and reminder for me that this child wanted to go to college and have a wonderful job, and if he was struggling, there was a reason, and I needed to figure out what it was. And so I think what I've learned over the years too is just saying, I believe in you, I support you, and just maintaining that hope as a parent just as much as friends. So,
well, let's talk, because we've got about 30 seconds left. You have monthly meetings. You've got all this support structure. I was very impressed. What's your website? Where can people go to get more information?
Our website is www.nami-northernvirginia.org. And that's the way to reach out to us for any of our programs, to get involved with our support groups. And also we have a wonderful walk. It's going to be held at the Tyson's Corner Center on September 20th. And that's a fun day of awareness and fundraising, of course, for us. And so we hope you'll come on out and join us then too.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.